What's up, you guys? Come on in. We're about to start another episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website if you want to engage in the content. We do start off on Instagram Live. So the official show is on Instagram Live. I also simulcast over on both of my Facebook pages. So if you want to access the show and engage live in the show, whether you're watching this on replay or if you're watching this on YouTube, however you're seeing this, you can engage live in the show if you go to Instagram and follow me. I'm Livin' Low Carb Man. That is my username, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. You can also watch the replay of them up to 24 hours on Instagram. But then we also have all the episodes up at JimmyRants.com. And if you go to YouTube, we also have them there as well. Type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants, and you should be able to find the show and watch it. So, lately, I have used my Jimmy Rants platform as a way to encourage you to think differently in the midst of this coronavirus COVID-19 outbreak that we have. So, people are panicked, people are freaking out, people are not in the right state of mind. And so I've talked about in previous episodes some of the physiological effects that's going on in your body right now dealing with this. I've also talked about the mental aspects of this and how it's affecting you. Last night I did a whole bunch of really positive stories that have come out in the midst of this coronavirus. Today I want to focus in on your brain. Because whether you realize it or not, when you are in a stressful situation and when you are in a state of crisis, which I think that adequately describes where we are right now in the world, when we're trying and having to do things that are far, far different than what is the norm, it messes with your brain. And you may not even realize this is happening. Maybe on a conscious level, you think, oh, I'm doing okay, and da-da-da-da-da. And so I wanted to read an article about understanding what's happening in your brain in the midst of a crisis, because you might notice some things happening. And one of the things that I put in the description of this show is why your brain's telling you to eat more carbs during this crisis. Have you noticed that? Can I be honest with you? I was wide awake at 2:30 this morning. I went out to a convenience store because I wanted something to eat and nothing was open and nobody was out there. So it was very safe for me to go out there. And I wanted to get some cheese sticks, maybe a beef stick, something that would tide me over because I was up so early. And can I tell you, for the first time in probably years, I felt the pull to get some carbs. Yes, the keto guy wanted carbs today because his brain was just screaming, screaming at me to buy some chips, to buy some cookies, to buy a candy bar, to buy something that I otherwise would never think about. Thought about it today. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed that you yourself are being drawn now to wanting carbohydrate in response to kind of the stress over this entire COVID-19 coronavirus? Don't lie. You know you have. Let's not pretend like this didn't happen. I have a couple of studies here that explain what happened. In fact, let me go right to that and then we'll get to the main one. Carb cravings are all your brain's fault, according to a study. So if you're a chronic stress eater, especially when it comes to carbs, you're worried, you're anxious, your chest tightens, and you reach for chips until the stress subsides. And this study came out of Japan, said it's not your fault. Your brain chemistry is to blame. Studies have shown most of the time people want high-fat foods, which are mixed with sugar, so that whole palatability of sugar, salt, fat usually is highly palatable for most people, things like ice cream, chocolate, fried foods. There are times when the carbs specifically are craved, where you want just a big old portion of mac and cheese, or in my case today, the chips were yelling out my name, the candy bar, the cookies. By the way, I did not give in. I knew what was happening. I was very conscious of what was happening. But if you don't know what's happening, you could very easily give in. Scientists have always suspected there's a mechanism that makes the switch in your brain from having a preference for fat to an increased appetite for carbohydrates. And until now, that mechanism responsible for the cravings has been a mystery, but these scientists now believe it is tied to one specific type of neuron in the hypothalamus. When they activated the neurons in mice, the rodents' taste preferences veered away from high fat and instead to high carb. The carb craving neuron gets set off by a hormone released during times of stress, which could explain why you stress eat and want comfort food. So when you start to feel on edge, your brain triggers that carb craving as part of the stress response. The study lead author, Professor Yoshiko Minakashi, many people who eat sweets too much when stressed tend to blame themselves for being unable to control their impulse. Now the researchers want to know if it's their lack of control or whether their brain actually shifts, which is what their theory is. So if you're craving carbs, your brain is probably craving energy. And we talked about this the other day as well. When you are a sugar burner, your brain is running on glucose. So what's the fastest way to get glucose into your bloodstream? It's to eat carbohydrate. So that's why you crave those carbs, specifically carbs, not fat and carbs, just straight carbs. I wonder if some of that is dampened if you're fat adapted. I wonder if some of that isn't as strong as it would have been if you are burning fat for fuel and you're fueling that 70% fat brain with mostly fat and ketones. Now, I've been pretty hardcore carnivore for a little while now, and I still had those cravings. So the stress itself is probably stoking some hunger hormone in us, whether it's ghrelin, whether it's whatever it is, something's going on that's making you do that. Now, there's another article here about why stress causes you to overeat. Stress eating, it is a thing. Stress, the hormones it unleashes, and the effects of sugary comfort food push people towards overeating. Researchers have linked weight gain to stress. Listen to this, you guys. This statistic blew me away. I'm not surprised, but it blew me away. And this statistic is under a non-crisis situation. We're now in a crisis, and it's going to be all the more shocking when you hear this is in a non-crisis situation. According to the American Psychological Association survey, 1/4 of Americans rate their stress at 8 or more on a 10-point scale. So 1 out of 4 of you in a normal situation already thinks your stress is right here and you're at the brink. Can you imagine what the statistics are right this moment with all the mass hysteria and fear and unknown uncertainty going on? People's brains are going there, and that stress is kicking in. Are you feeling it? Do you feel the stress impacting you? Are you having trouble kind of thinking straight right now? It's not by accident. And we're going to get into the main article here in a minute about understanding what's going on in a crisis in your brain, but these studies were really good. In the short term, stress can shut down your appetite. Initially, maybe when all this happened, you weren't that hungry and maybe you chose not to eat. But then the nervous system sends messages to your adrenal glands that are sitting on top of the kidneys to pump out epinephrine, which is the adrenaline. So that gives you that immediate kind of energy. Epinephrine helps trigger the body's fight or flight response, a revved up physiological state that temporarily puts eating on hold. But if that stress persists, which right now we're right at about intensively just about a week that we've been in this kind of 24-hour news cycle about coronavirus being very real, a lot of us self-quarantining, socially distancing and all those things, and it's starting to take its toll. The adrenal glands, if the stress continues, release another hormone called cortisol. We know that's the stress hormone. Cortisol itself will increase your appetite and will also ramp up motivation in general to go eat something. So when cortisol goes up, and appetite goes up in response to that, it's telling you to eat. Once the stressful episode is over, cortisol levels should fall, but if the stress doesn't go away, like we're dealing with right now, people are still stressed about this coronavirus and the uncertainty and the unknown of it all and how long it's going to go. Or if a person's stress response gets stuck in the on position permanently, which a lot of people will be long after this is over, that on button about the stress of this isn't going to go away, even when the fears start to subside. Cortisol might stay elevated, and that'll cause problems. So stress seems to affect your food preferences. Numerous studies have shown that physical or emotional distress increases your intake of foods that are high in fat, sugar, and both. High cortisol in combination with high insulin, which ironically, the biggest thing that boosts insulin levels, stress in and of itself can do that, but the biggest thing you do in your diet that raises insulin is simple carbohydrates. And so what do we choose when we need comfort food? Simple carbohydrates. Those chips, the candy that was calling my name at 3 o'clock this morning. That's what the brain was telling me to get. May be responsible for this. So other research suggests ghrelin, which is a hunger hormone, also may play a role. So once you eat fat and sugar-filled foods, they seem to have a feedback effect that dampens down the stress and emotion. These foods really are comfort foods in that they seem to counteract the stress, and this may contribute to people's stress-induced craving for these foods. So when you have stress and you choose to eat these foods and your mood and stress is calmed down as a result of eating the foods, your brain remembers that. And so it remembers that so that the next time you get in a stressful situation like we're in now, it's like, I want that. And so it just re-solidifies in your brain that that's what you want to do to comfort yourself. Overeating isn't the only stress-related behavior that can add pounds. Stressed people also lose sleep. They also exercise less, drink more alcohol, all of which can contribute to excess weight gain. Now, some research suggests gender differences in stress coping, with women being more likely to turn to food, men more likely to turn to alcohol and smoking. A Finnish study included over 5,000 men and women, showed obesity was associated with stress-related eating in women, but not in men. I'm sure there's plenty of men that stress eat food. It's not just alcohol and smoking. Harvard researchers have reported that stress from work and other sorts of problems correlate with weight gain, but only in those who are overweight at the beginning. One theory is that overweight people already have elevated insulin, and stress-related weight gain is more likely to occur in the presence of high insulin. That's my concern right now. A lot of people, they come to keto because they're already damaged. They already have insulin resistance. They already have type 2 diabetes. Their insulin levels are already pretty elevated. And now you add on top of that person this new stress of uncertainty and fear that this coronavirus COVID-19 is providing everybody right now. It's a dangerous mix. So if that's you and you're self-aware of that and you know that, you more than anybody else need to be practicing huge self-love and self-care right now, because you don't need to ruin your long-term health over a short-term problem. This coronavirus is not going to last forever and ever. It's going to be a while, but it's not going to be forever. In the totality of your life, this is a blip on the map, okay? Don't sacrifice years of your life down the road all at the altar of worrying about what's going on right this moment. That makes sense? How much cortisol people produce in response to stress may also factor in the weight gain equation from that stress. In 2007, British researchers designed a study that showed people who responded to stress with high cortisol in an experimental setting were more likely to snack in response to daily hassles in their regular lives than those who had lower cortisol. So are you finding you're just reaching for food mindlessly right now? Catch yourself. Doesn't mean you don't need to eat it, but just know why you're eating it and not eating it for the sake of the stress response, but eating because you're actually physiologically hungry. So how do you relieve the stress? This is kind of a cool little part of this story too. Meditation. So a lot of studies have shown that just deep breathing exercises, being quiet with yourself, if you're a Christian or if someone of faith, maybe you pray, that all will calm down stress. Exercise. A lot of people are like, oh, I can't go to the gym. You got a body, you got body weight, you've got a yard and a house and all kinds of things. Do something. Use body weight exercises, get creative. A lot of my exercise friends in the keto space are posting videos to encourage people to still move in the midst of this. And then get social support. I talked about this in a whole Jimmy Rants just yesterday, that we don't need to neglect, even though we're being socially isolated and distanced from other people, doesn't mean we need to be distant from talking to them on the phone or video chat or text message. Just stay in touch, and that will be helpful. All right, let me get to the main part of what I came on here today. I thought those studies were really interesting to maybe give you context as to why, despite you being keto, despite you being carnivore, you're probably having some major carb cravings. So now you understand the why. Let's look at what's going on inside the brain. So this is from AUSIMMBulletin.com, and it's called Understanding Your Brain in the Midst of a Crisis. You ready for this? This is really good stuff. When confronted with an emergency, the human brain can behave in a way that seems rational, but in fact, it's very disastrous. Understanding the thought processes and brain behavior will help you make a positive decision in the midst of a crisis. So in the mining industry, it can be remarkably hazardous. Understanding how the brain operates during a crisis can help leaders there to think more clearly and effectively manage emergencies, including mining emergencies. So in this article, we're going to outline some ideas about how to manage hazards and emergencies based on this experience within the miners. So 2 central facts about your brain that are key to understanding how it operates in the midst of a crisis. Pay attention, guys. This is so cool. The first thing you need to know about your brain is it has a tripartite structure. Okay, so that means there's 3 parts to it. The cerebellum, which is the brainstem, similar in structure to the reptilian brain, it controls the fight, freeze, or flee response when you're confronted with a crisis. The second part of that, the limbic system, is in the mid area of the brain. It functions much like the brains that are found in mammals. It's responsible for your emotional response. Then the third part, it's located on the top of your brain. It's called the neocortex. This is a part of the cerebral cortex and is involved in the higher order functions that we associate with being a human being. Things like language, spatial reasoning, and logic. So you see these very clear distinctions between the various parts of the brain and what their role is. When you are stressed, the cerebral cortex can be emotionally hijacked by the limbic system or the brainstem. Did you know that? And when this happens, reactions are dictated by the cerebellum or limbic system before the neocortex can moderate or control those reactions. This explains why some leaders panic in the midst of a crisis, even though that would be the worst time to panic. You know, we often like to criticize leaders for doing the wrong thing in the midst of a crisis. And we've got some boneheaded leaders around the world. There's boneheaded leaders. And a lot of them have made some really bad judgment calls in the midst of this coronavirus outbreak. And I think we need to understand their brain is just responding as a lot of brains do in the midst of a crisis. Now, if they recognize what we're talking about here today, then maybe they could put in mechanisms to recognize it sooner and then not make the boneheaded mistakes. But a lot of people, this all happens unbeknownst to them. And then suddenly they're not making good judgments in the midst of thinking they are. This is the ironic thing about it all. Fortunately, it is possible for the cerebral cortex to regain control. Remember Sully, Captain Chesley Sullenberger, who safely landed U.S. Airway Flight 1549, the Hudson River, a few years ago after both of the plane's engines were damaged. If you were to listen to the communication between Sully and the air traffic controllers in the midst of that crisis, you would be surprised how calm he sounded. I remember watching that movie. Tom Hanks, I believe, played Sully. Really, really intense situation, and he was so clear-minded because he was aware of what was going on in his brain, of what we're talking about here, and it was definitely a crisis because all the passengers on that plane would have likely died had he not taken action that was reasonable in the midst of it. It would have been easy for his brain to get overwhelmed and panicked, but he stayed calm and he saved all those lives of those people. Similarly, mining leaders need to be able to recognize what's happening around them and within them in the midst of a crisis, practice what airline pilots call deliberate calm. In other words, be aware when your body is panicking, but not acting on the feeling. So maybe lately you've been feeling panicked. You've been feeling a sense of anxiety where you're kind of on edge. It's okay to have that feeling in your body. It's not okay to let that feeling overwhelm you. And this is my concern as someone in the health space. I'm seeing people who are otherwise doing healthy habits not taking care of this part of their health. And guys, this part of your health could impact the rest of your health for the rest of your life if you don't get this under control. Pilots practice and develop their capacity for deliberate calm during simulation training. And if Sully managed to maintain calmness after losing both engines with 200 people on board, it follows that it must be possible for leaders in other emergencies to know how to stay calm too. And I would say you and you and you are able to control how you feel, how you respond in the midst of a crisis. And you can stay calm. You just have to be aware. And this is what I'm trying to do in my Jimmy Rants lately is eyes wide open. Are you paying attention to your physiological response? Are you paying attention to how you're different than you usually are? Or if you are different, I would assume most people, their brains aren't letting them fully process everything that's happening with this. This coronavirus COVID-19 thing is one of the most unprecedented things I've seen in my lifetime. And we probably will never see anything like this again in our lifetime. And so people are not used to this. Their brains haven't fully wrapped their heads around what's going on here. But you can practice and learn to be calm in the midst of a crisis. Part of doing this involves having sufficient emotional intelligence to know the difference between those times when we should listen to and be moved by emotion, and then those times when we should discount and override the emotion. Deliberate calm also involves practicing the fine art of discounting and overriding your automatic emotional response again and again until it feels as familiar as the other skills that we have mastered through practice. So, it's not going to be easy. Now, when you remove yourself from your emotion, some people say you become stoic and that you become cold and hard. I think you can still have a heart for people and a heart for situations without those feelings of having a heart for those people and situations overwhelming you. And you know you best. You know how you react in the midst of stuff going on in your life. If you're one of those people who naturally worries about things in a non-crisis situation, then obviously you're the one who's most hysterical right now. And all I would ask you to do is know yourself. If you know you're that way, check yourself, take a step back, take a deep breath, separate yourself from all the news coverage that's going on right now. None of that's doing your mind, your mental health, your brain any good at all. And trust me, you're not going to learn anything watching all that stuff constantly. You're just going to continue to burden yourself, worry yourself, put yourself in a panic even more, and you cannot stay calm. And right now, more than ever, we need to stay calm. The second central fact about your brain in a crisis is that it constantly and automatically seeks to predict the future, at least in the short term. So right now, we have been told, don't leave your house if at all possible for the next couple weeks. That was the last thing that President Trump put out there a few days ago. Let's all stay in our houses for at least the next couple weeks, probably the next month, and let's see what happens. Okay? So in your mind, you're like, okay, maybe things will get better in a couple weeks, but what if they don't? But maybe it's going to go into June. Oh man, I had something planned in May. And your brain is just racing to all these scenarios. And trust me, you're talking to the king of playing out scenarios in his head. That's literally how my brain works. I don't go to worst case scenario. I go to all case scenario. Like I literally play this out. Like the best case is within a month this is all over. Everything is done. The quarantine's done. We've flattened the curve. Da 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 da. That's the best case scenario in my head. And the worst case is this goes to the fall. So it's like the truth is probably somewhere in between, but that's where my brain has gone. But I'm doing that not to worry and obsess about it, but that's how our brain goes. We predict the future, trying to anyway. Of course, this predictive nature of the brain is a great advantage because it helps you prepare, and it is a contributing factor in why you can stay calm even in the midst of the crisis, because you have some action plan going on up here that's telling you things are going to be okay, because whatever conclusion you come to in your brain, you've already been there in your head. And so you're seeing it come to a conclusion. If you did not have this ability, you would be constantly crashing the supermarket trolleys into other people that are shopping. You'd bash into vehicles before you left the car park. However, like most advantages, there is a disadvantage to this as well. Because we unconsciously focus on what we think is going to happen, we can be slow to notice what is actually happening, particularly when we are confronted by the unexpected. So think about a week ago. Everybody was living their lives. The NCAA March Madness was getting ready to start. The NBA was happening. So much of normal life was happening. And we thought, okay, we've heard about this old coronavirus thing. It's no big deal. And then suddenly, pow! Sports are shutting down. People are dying. They're telling us that we need to stay out of the public so that we don't spread the virus to people that are susceptible. And suddenly everything that we had in our head about this coronavirus, COVID-19, suddenly changed on a dime. And so if you had this expectation of all things are fine, everything's good, everything's normal, and then suddenly it's not normal, it's not fine, that shocked a lot of people's brains last week. And I think we're just now coming on the other side of that, where people are accepting this as the new reality, at least for the time being. And so they're wrapping their heads around, okay, since this is the new normal, now what? So it's kind of doing this adjustment period. A simple example will help to explain what I mean by this. Think about the amount of automatic prediction that is involved in catching a ball. So when someone throws a ball at you, you've got a lot of automatic things that happen. Your brain needs to estimate how fast the ball is coming at you, the arc along with how it is moving, to predict where and when your hands need to be where the ball is close enough so you can catch it. But if you ask someone who just caught the ball, how did you work out where and when to place your hands? They usually say, I don't know, or I just kept my eye on the ball. So consider this arithmetic task. This one tripped me out, you guys. And I guarantee you, most of you won't get this right. You ready? This is really good. I'd like to ask you how much you want to pay if I had a bat and a ball you wanted to buy the ball. You might say, well, how much did you pay for the ball when you first bought it? So suppose I answer that question with, together, the bat and the ball cost me $1.10. The bat cost me $1 more than the ball, so how much did the ball cost? You probably have an answer in your head, and I'm going to tell you the very first answer that popped in your head is the wrong answer. Most people quickly arrive at the obvious answer in their mind of 10 cents. How many had 10 cents? Admit it. But this would be wrong. It seems so obvious, didn't it? Because our brain's predilection for prediction can often lead us into making an error. To most people, this sounded like a simple matter of subtracting $1 from 110. So we decided that 10 cents must be the answer. Our brain's tendency to take advantage of past experience to understand the present rather than taking the time to listen carefully to the details of the situation will always trip us up. If the ball did cost 10 cents, then the bat has to cost $1 more than that, which is $1.10. So together the bat and the ball would have been $1.20, not $1.10. So the correct answer is the ball was 5 cents. So the bat cost $1 more than that, which is $1.05, and together they cost $1.10. Did that trip any of you guys up? Am I messing with your head today? Do you have a headache over the math? See how your brain can be predictive and be wrong. And this is what can happen in the midst of a crisis. Now think about when this tendency to understand the present in terms of the past could be helpful during a crisis, when it could be disastrous. The unexpected errors and events that occur during an emergency often require you to think fast and take action from those who are caught in the middle of it, but that fast thinking has to be alert, fully conscious, and it's not always automatic. So if you fell into automatic mode when this all started going down, you might have made factual errors and not even realize it in how you reacted. You've probably seen that famous clip on YouTube of a group of young men playing basketball while someone wearing a bear suit walks casually from one side of the screen to the other. Most of the viewers never saw the bear until they were asked to look carefully to see if they see anything unusual happening in the background. That clip and similar examples demonstrate what a powerful impact your expectations are predicted by your brain can have on your ability to clearly see what's happening. So you're sitting there and you're engaged watching the basketball. Meanwhile, there's a bear walking in the background. Why didn't you see the bear? Because your brain said, I'm watching the basketball. The brain is a fascinating thing, you guys. This is one of the reasons why critical incident debriefings are so important. When teams spend the time to share their perceptions of what happened during an emergency, and in particular share their experiences of what surprised them, the members of the team are alerted to the fact that everyday expectations simply cannot be relied upon during a crisis. So responding appropriately to a crisis as a leader requires you to be trained and practiced, but it also requires an understanding of how humans and our brains operate, especially in times of stress. So I think what we're going through right now heavily qualifies as a time of stress. Stress doesn't mean you need to succumb to that stress. Stress doesn't mean you can't think clearly in the midst of it. Stress just means you have a new wrinkle to have to deal with, knowing that your brain is trying to adapt to this new situation. So now that you're self-aware of this, now that you realize what's going on, now that you have some strategies in place about, okay, now I'm seeing what's going on possibly in my head, now you know that maybe you need to watch yourself and you need to see if you're falling into this and make sure you're staying level-headed, you're staying calm, you're not getting overwhelmed. That's the main reason I'm coming on Jimmy Rants so much with all this kind of stuff is I just feel like people are driving themselves crazy over this coronavirus. And they're getting overwhelmed, the unpredictability of it. People in general just don't do well with unpredictability. When you don't know what's going to happen next, it makes you go crazy. Especially those like really perfectionist people that like to have order and everything just so, and all of that's been blown to smithereens right now. Now you're going to have some semblance of normality to try to keep it going, but let's be honest, all of us have been impacted and had our lives totally shaken up by this. And it's how you respond and how you recognize how your brain is trying to adjust to this that will help you as you move forward. All right, let's see what you guys have to say. Welcome in, welcome in. We're going to go to Instagram Live first. If we have time, we'll come over here to Facebook. Thank you to my Living La Vida Low Carb Facebook page. Can't see you, but hi. So hey, Instagram, and if you're watching on replay on YouTube, thanks for being here. You can see all the past episodes up on YouTube. Just type in Jimmy Rants. You'll find the show also at jimmyrants.com. All right, let's see what you guys have to say. Jess says it's true. All of my carb cravings have skyrocketed. It's a natural physiological response, Jess. And so it was freaky for me because here I am out in public. I'll be at 3 a.m., but I'm out in public and I'm sitting there staring at carbs on the shelf. Can you imagine somebody taking a picture of Jimmy Moore staring at bags and bags and bags of chips? Yeah, the paparazzi, they missed an opportunity today to really humiliate the keto guy. Bonnie says, I went to the store. Everyone was hoarding up on food and supplies. It was then that I started wanting all the carbs and I ate some. You know, there's no shame. I am not going to judge anyone who decides to give in to that carb craving. Let's face it, our brains are overwhelmed right now. And some people need that hit. Not saying it's right, but I'm not judging you. If that's something you felt like you needed to do to break the tension and to truly calm your brain down, then no judgment from me. You do what you got to do, but there is a very real reason physiologically in your body why you're desiring those things. Jesse said people seemed calmer at Target than they did a couple of days ago because there was order today, lines, one-way traffic down the aisles, a police monitoring everything, and then regular communication from the manager. I love that. People want order and control in the midst of a crisis because it's comforting. That's one thing I've tried to do here. Thank you, Jesse. I've tried to be a calm voice of reason in the midst of all this because I feel like so many people are panicked that they're desiring somebody not panicking. And not once in the midst of all this have I panicked. There's no reason to panic. It's happening. We just have to accept it's happening and what's happening and just know that we're going to be okay. And as Patty said, hold on to your faith in God or whatever you believe in because this will pass. And you're right, Patty. Thank you for sharing that. All right, let's come over to my Facebook page over here. Hello, you guys. See what you guys have to say about all this. Mitzi says, fear is a good thing, but what we do with it and how we respond to it makes all the difference in the world. The purpose of fear is to get you to take action. Yeah, people forget. You get scared because the body is trying to say, hey, dummy, something's happening. So take action sooner than later. Norma says, I had Birch Bender's keto pancakes for a meal, more carbs than usual. I don't even like the pancakes. Could have been much worse, but I made it. Hey, don't beat yourself up over it. I think if you're trying to be good and it happens to be a few more carbs than normal, so be it. I did end up getting some Justin's dark chocolate peanut butter cup things. So I guess you could say technically I did have a little bit of something, but those are pretty low in sugar. Christy said roast beef, pork, panko shuffle. Awesome. Jill says the struggle is real. Yes, the struggle is very, very real. Glad to have you back, says Geraldine. Thank you, Geraldine. I'm glad to be back. This has been a lot of fun being back on Jimmy Rants. If I'd known when I came back on March the 1st from my sabbatical, if I'd known I'd be having to do these kind of Jimmy Rants episodes, I would have been like, maybe I stay away a little while longer. No, I'm glad I'm back, and I'm glad because a lot of you guys have written to me and said, oh, thank God, like you have really helped me with this. So if you like this kind of content, let me know. I definitely want to keep doing this kind of content. I assume nobody really cares at this point about the finer points of keto and fasting at this moment. There will be a time for that. I've talked a lot about that on my past episodes, so definitely check them out on jimmyrants.com. But I just feel like right now we need to encourage each other. We need to love on each other. We need to provide positivity in the midst of this, because this overwhelming negativity is going to beat you down, and it won't end well for any of us if that happens. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. As always, go to jimmyrants.com. You can also go to YouTube and type in the keyword Jimmy Rants. You'll find all the past episodes. You want to follow me? I'm on Instagram. We do this show live on Instagram, simulcast on Facebook. Go over to Instagram and follow me at Livin' Low Carb Man, LIVIN LOWCARBMAN. And yeah, check it out. Thanks for being here today, you guys. And until next time, we'll see you then. All right.